Hebrews chapter 1. Sometimes it's difficult to understand why question would come up, but so I read it first couple of verses, and then question is linked with the Jesus to be the representative of God. That means he's not God, he's just a representative. So I read it. In the past, God spoke to our forefathers through the prophets at many times and in various ways. But in these days, he has spoken to us by his Son, whom he appointed heir of all things, and through whom he made the universe. The Son is the radiance of the God's glory and the exact representation of his being, sustaining all things by his powerful word. After he had provided purification for our sins, he sat down at the right hand of the majesty in heaven. So he become as much superior to the angels as the name he has inherited is superior to theirs. So, in verse 3, when it says he's the exact representation of his being, because he's the representative, therefore he is not God.
Yeah, so a lot here. Notice what the text tells us about Jesus, right? In Hebrews 1, it tells us in verse 2, it says, through whom also he made the world, right? So the world was made through the Son. Okay? That can't be said of Jesus if he's merely a creature. If the world was made through him, then Jesus is the world's creator, and he was there prior to the world's existence. Now, in fact, the Greek here, the literal Greek is, it says that the ages were created through the Son. So this doesn't only point to the fact that the world, creation itself, is a product of the Son creating it together with the Father. It shows that even time itself is attributed to Christ. Time didn't exist apart from the creative agency of the Son. This means the Son is eternal. Okay. Like I said before, whenever you read anything, you should read it in context. Muslims refuse to do that. Christians have to force them to. It's like, I remember when my daughter was young, she was terrible about taking medicine. When she was sick, we had to get her to take medicine. And it was always very difficult for my wife and I trying to get her to take the medicine. But we knew she needed it. We knew she needed it, but she was so young that all she knew is this stuff doesn't taste good, right? So we're over there trying to get her to, almost forcing her to take this medicine. Well, in a similar way, we have to force Muslims to pay attention to the context of the verses that they're reading, because they apparently don't want to do that on their own. The verses of the Bible, the revelation of God doesn't taste good to them, right? They don't like what God is telling them, so they try and spit it out of their mouth and focus on other things that they think taste good, right? And so what they think tastes good is this statement that he is the representation of God's nature. But again, verse 2 says everything was created through him. So whatever the representation of his nature means, it does not mean that Christ is not fully God or that he is not eternal, because Jesus is the agent of creation of time itself. Moreover, notice what it goes on to say immediately after the statement, he is the representation of his nature. It says, he upholds all things by the word of his power. Okay, so not only did Jesus create everything, he upholds everything by the word of his power. Once again, this can only be said of God. The Old Testament scriptures are clear. This is God's activity. God is the author, the agent of providence. God is the one who upholds and governs the world. Here, the author of Hebrews says it's the Son. So the Son created the world, the Son providentially upholds and governs the world. Then, through a litany of Old Testament citations, I won't go over all of these, the author of Hebrews identifies Jesus as superior to the angels. He's superior to the angels because God referred to him as his son, it says in verse 5, whereas the angels, according to the same verse, are not sons. not sons in this sense, not sons in this transcendent sense. Moreover, in verse 6, the angels are commanded to worship the Son. So again, he's superior to the angels. And in verse 7, we're told that the angels are just ministering spirits. So the Son is superior even to angelic powers, right? Because he is the Son, because he deserves their worship, because he created all things, because he upholds all things by the word of his power. This is all so much the case that the author of Hebrews in verse 8 refers to the Son as God, saying, in fact, he says the Father, right, of the Son, he, the Father says, your throne, O God, is forever and ever. Okay? So God says of the Son, your throne is forever and ever. Then in verse 10, the Father says of the Son, you, Lord, in the beginning laid the foundation of the earth, and the heaven are the work of your hands. So he calls Jesus Lord and ascribes to him once again creation and even immutability. He says that everything is going to perish. In verse 11, they will perish, but you remain. They'll become old like a garment, and like a mantle, you will roll them up like a garment. They will also be changed, but you are the same, and your years will not come to an end. So Jesus is the immutable Lord who created and upholds all of reality and is therefore superior to the angels and worthy of their worship. Okay? So, does this chapter teach that Jesus is not God? Well, to take a phrase out of it and then try and make something out of it that's contrary to the whole context is just laughable. What the text says in verse 3 is, it says he is the radiance of his glory, and the idea is it's saying that he's the outshining of God's glory. God's very glory is what Christ exudes. He is the outshining of that glory. And it says not simply a representative. That's not the idea there. When it says the representation of his nature, notice it says the exact representation of his nature. I would say it's better to say the identical expression of his nature. Representation is not the best word, but if you simply pay attention to the actual words that are used here, he's not a mere normally when we think of a representation of something, we think of it as something less than an exact thing, right? So like if I take a picture of you, right, that's a representation of you, but it obviously falls short of you. It's not you, right? The picture is not equal to you. You are of more value than the picture, right? So, and then moreover, if you have a picture and then somebody makes a copy of it, the copy could look a lot like the picture, but it still doesn't have the same value, right? If you have a original Picasso, right, a painting from Picasso, and then somebody copies it, the copy is not as valuable as the original because the copy has flaws in it, right? There are differences between the copy and the original. But the author of Hebrews says that Jesus, the Son, is the exact representation of his nature. What he's saying is not that Jesus is anything less than fully what the Father is. He is exactly what the Father is. That's why he can say he's the radiance of his glory. That's why he can say he created the ages. That's why he can say the angels owe him their worship. That's why he is God and Lord and immutable and so forth. So, again, it's laughable to appeal to a text like Hebrews 1 and pretend that a statement like this is intended to convey the very opposite of what the whole first chapter of Hebrews is about.